All right, sit back, relax. It's time for another Laneway Talks.
I'd like to introduce Jeff Duff. How are you, Jeff?
Hey, man, I'm good. I've just come back from jogging around the block and doing a few overs on my cricket pitch out the front.
Ah, lovely, absolutely lovely. Well, we wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the career of Jeff Duff and where you started and where you're at now. I'd like to kind of start with where did you grow up? Can you give us a
Well, I'm a Melbourne boy, where you guys are located. I live in Sydney now, but I was born in Melbourne, and I had great education, great schools. I fondly remember my first primary school. It was called Canterbury State School. And obviously it was in Canterbury where we lived. I lived with my family in Canterbury. Beautiful.
Very affluent suburb, very affluent.
It is now. It was probably a little more working class back when I grew up there, but we loved it. It was like the Partridge Family. Everybody played music, and we're all young and enthusiastic. A few of us played sport. I'd always played sport. That was my primary school. Then I went to Box Hill Technical School after that one, and I guess my claim to fame in both of those schools was that I was captain of the cricket team and the football team.
Oh, very athletic.
Yes. Well, when I was younger, I don't know, this could be a little involved. When I was younger, I inherited my mum's lung disease. So my breathing was never ever, really, really good. So the doctors told my mother to let Jeffrey run around and go crazy playing sports. So I took up every sport. I played cricket, tennis, basketball, hockey, soccer, everything.
Well, tell me a little bit, therefore. So if you're doing all of that, gone to Swinburne.
I went to Swinburne after Box Hill Tech, yes. As an art student.
As an art student. Now, with Box Hill Tech and then to Swinburne, were they very musical schools? So therefore, did it foster a musical career? Yes,
it did actually. I started learning drums. I had a passion for playing drums and percussion when I was 7, 8, 9, and then my grandmother lent me some money to buy a snare drum, which progressed to a full kit, second-hand kit, and then I joined a little trio when I was about 10 or 11 or something like that at Canterbury State School.
Yeah,
I remember I used to get on my bicycle to go to practice with my whatever parts of my drum kit I could fit on the rack at the back of the bike, and we practiced. And then we played at school celebration events at Canterbury State. And I went to Box Hill Tech, and I was in a band there called we were called Y, WHY, and we played hits at the time, pop hits, and that was a little 3-piece with me playing drums.
Are we talking like pop music, or were you a bit like Jimmy Page and doing rhythm and blues?
Well, a little bit of everything. And I played drums. And I started playing, as I mentioned, I started playing drums. But then I was singing as well, because Mum used to play piano. We had a beautiful piano in Canterbury, and I was going to singing lessons. So I must have been about 12, 13, 14, and I wanted to sing. So I was playing drums and singing. Then in the end, when I reached Swinburne, I just wanted to be a rock star out the front and sing, because I was really into clothes by then. I was really into designing my own clothes at Swinburne and wearing my own outfits. So I wanted to display them. The only way I could display them was by being out the front.
Now, tell me, Jeff, you're known as a very flamboyant visual artist, and therefore, if we take it back there to Swinburne, were you as flamboyant back then before, let's say, before Kush?
Oh, yeah. yes, at Swinburne, which was Swinburne Art College at that time, early 70s, was a breeding ground for a lot of rock bands. All the guys from Metal 8, they all, Mick Bettis and Brendan, the guitarist, and Terry, the bass player, and also Jack Venus, the drum. Actually, the entire band from Metal 8, they're my Swinburne Art College rivals in regard to music. We were all trying to outdo one another musically. I was in a band then called actually, before then, I was in a band with David Briggs and George McCardle from Little River Band. We, coming out of Box Hill Tech, I formed a little band in Melbourne, and I just ended up with David Briggs and George McCardle and the drummer from Real Life, I think it was.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, they were all superstar musicians, and I was, the dumb singer. And we do covers. We do covers of whatever was happening at the time. I think we did The Who. And
well, tell me, Jeffrey, back then, I'm only a few years younger than you, not much. I was from La Trobe University, and we used to go to Swinburne every Friday to go in the Union Hall and watch bands play, which was free of charge because the student union would put it on. So you would have anybody from the Bushwhackers to whoever, anybody would be playing there. And it was so musical that it doesn't surprise me what you're saying, that, you had these quite famous Australian artists who were there at the same time. And we had this rich creative talent coming out of there. So, well, going from there, how did it move to, I presume, Kush being your, you decided you loved music, obviously, by that stage. So let's move over to Kush. How did that all occur?
Well, I was in so many different bands, and I was offered all these. As I progressed through all the bands, I had so many bands. After Box Hill, I ended up doing find these musicians that were into Blood, Sweat and Tears in Chicago, mainly Blood, Sweat and Tears. But it was only one. There was only one trumpet, but we thought we sounded like Blood, Sweat and Tears, and it was a great rhythm section. But we were all young, all young, 15, 16, 17, and then. After the guys from Little River, what happened with Little River Band was after Kush. Oh, gee, there was a big jump. That's right. I was singing in these 20-piece big bands, swing bands, and out of that there were all these musicians that wanted to form a Blood, Sweat and Tears style band in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And they auditioned singers, loads of singers, but I ended up getting the gig because I think I looked, more groovy than the others. I don't know whether I sang any better, but I definitely looked very groovy because I was.
Well, don't flatter yourself. You know you're a good singer, so let's just continue on there.
Well, no, I don't know. I don't know I'm a good singer at all. I have doubts about my capabilities as a singer, especially when I hear some of the amazing singers around the world. But anyway, I persisted with my singing, and like early on, Mum would play piano, and I'd sing all the standards of the day, like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, show tunes.
So that's how Kush started, from coming out of these big bands that you were playing in, and therefore everybody tried to come to grips with, well, what are we going to do? And I presume around that time it was so creative with artists around Melbourne.
Yeah, I mean, Melbourne was a hot spot for emerging musicians. I mean, a lot of people were still learning their craft, but they all seem to draw from one another. And look, well, you're from Melbourne. There's so many bands, in the late 60s, early 70s, mid 70s that were forming and becoming quite successful, if not on the recording front, on the live front. I think in Melbourne, the main thing about Melbourne was if you could make it live, then you were good for whatever followed, whether it be recording or touring, concerts, whatever.
Yeah.
So it was a good breeding ground in Melbourne.
Well,
and as I said, a lot of it started at the art college, Swinburne Art College. There's so many musicians came out of that went into successful bands.
Well, what I think, I can only give my own personal impressions is that I remember the first Kush album, and it was firstly the quality of the recording. So, you can have overproduced recording, you can have harsh recording, but what Kush gave was this crystal clear, I call it jazz rock. So it had a jazz rock pop, and that's what it had. So you had these sensational musicians, and then you out front with this fantastic voice, and then this visual show that came with it. You might as well call it a cabaret show out front. I mean, it comes up there with the Mother Goose type artistry, and everybody was so. Wow, you're really going to get your money's worth when you go out to see Kush. You're going to get this fantastic band, and you're going to get this sensational front person. And was that what happened? Did you? Because I obviously only came to a few shows, but were you packing the houses out all around, Melbourne?
We were. Look, we were a really, really popular live band, and as I said, that was the sign of success for any band in Melbourne. If you could fill rooms and make a skinless living out of performing live, because most of them were full-time musicians, maybe teaching on the side. But yeah, we ended up being a splinter band from this big band, and we ended up getting a residency at the Prospect Hill Hotel in Kew. We were the most successful and popular band there every Tuesday night and every Saturday afternoon.
Very famous hotel.
Yeah, and we packed the place out. It was just, you couldn't get in there after a while. And I don't even know how many people, probably only held, 100, 150, if that. I'm not sure. It was just the lounge at the front of the hotel. But that was an incredible breeding ground.
Well, I'll tell you what I remember about the Prospect Hill Hotel. I've seen many artists there. Everybody played the Prospect Hill, including international artists. I did see Steve Marriott from the Small Faces at the Prospect Hill Hotel. And for our young audience, what used to happen back in those days, to have your license, your publican's license, to go that late, and we're only talking 11:30, at 10 o'clock you had to serve some food. You had to have food served. So what would you get? They would give you 4 dim sims, or they'd give you a little bowl of chips. That's what you got as part of your entry fee to see the artist. You got your food. And that was very, very exciting too, because we were all university students and nobody had much money. So that feed was quite sought after, especially if you could get a second serve. But what a famous hotel. And yeah, I could only imagine, those days. Now, again, what we do know, and we explore this all the time, and it's becoming quite commonly known, I think, for the young audience, that back then you could actually do 4 or 5 shows a week, no problem, and you could earn a living. I mean, we were talking to one of our artists last week who never made it on your level back then, did later on with James Freud and Berlin and the All Stars, and said, even for a local band, because they had to take in their own PA system, Jeff, they had to own a truck, they had a road crew, they had to own all that equipment. That was for your bands who were essentially touring around Victoria and got out of Victoria occasionally, but had never had a hit on the radio as such, not like Kush. And so, it was such it was a real business, whereas, you don't do that these days. So tell me a little bit, the first Kush album was extremely successful. Molly Loved You on Countdown. So we then moved to the second album. Now, the second album isn't setting the world on fire. What happened?
Look, I think the same thing that happens with most bands. You have personnel changes, and it causes conflict, and that definitely affected the music. I was the main writer, along with Dave Herzog, the guitarist, and whoever else. Oh, and Steve Ball, who are, a few of us contributed to the songwriting. But the even though on the first album, Snow White, that went gold, by the way.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was hugely successful, mainly because of MacArthur Park and Living on Easy Street, I think, and a few other things. I mean, it was, as you said, it was. I think you could probably. I know you call it jazz rock. I think it was prog rock, progressive rock.
Yeah.
With a horn section.
A classic record too in Australian music history, for sure.
Yeah, noted by the album cover.
Oh, the album cover was sensational. Absolutely.
That was done by another connection from Swinburne Art College. I mean, Swinburne Art College, it was like an umbrella. Everybody in the music scene, whether they be the graphic artists for album covers or the journalists or the groupies, whatever.
Well, I tell you, I give you what I felt between the first Kush album, Snow White, and Get Your Bananas Out. If that's, I think it was called Nah, Don't, whatever. But the difference to me was the first record was extremely polished in the creativity of the songs. The second album, I still like it. It just felt a little bit rushed as I listened to it.
Yeah, well, the first album was produced at Bill Armstrong Studios. Do you remember those?
Yes, I do.
South Melbourne?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's still there, but it has a different name now, doesn't it? Or maybe it's still there, I'm not sure.
I think they've just gone.
Yeah, and the second album, I think we also recorded the second album there, but we lost our way, as I said, mainly because personnel changes. And also we eliminated, Kush was... part of the winning formula for Kush on the first album was the 5-piece, 4-piece horn section.
Yeah.
The second album we cut the horn section back, which really wasn't what Kush should have been. So we lost our way. And the songwriting, we were sort of starting to get into funk music too. Steve Ball and myself and Dave Herzog, but having me out the front, I'm not really a funk singer, so it
all came to an end, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean,
well, tell me, what happened? Well, what happened? So it comes to an end, as a lot of artists do, and Jeff Duff has to do some soul searching, or does Jeff Duff have to do no soul searching? He's straight back into it, and wham, you're out there playing again.
Look, I've never ever stopped right up to this day, and I've always had loads of different things on the boil. Like even in Kush, I was doing solo shows, even with backing tapes. Again, which is it was fairly primitive. I'd go on the road when I was with Kush. I'd go on the road with skyhooks, just me with a cassette recorder, and I'd open up the show for skyhooks. I'd open up the show for Little River Band, doing just Jeff Duff solo with I'd have inflatable dolls and all these little gimmicky things on stage, and I'd sing and I'd do. It's funny because I'd be dressing in clothes that I designed, like leotards and things, because they were simple and easy to get in and out of. I always have costume changes, but I'd be singing, beautiful, beautiful big ballads like Maria and Somewhere from West Side Story, and so it was a strange onslaught for the audience because they'd see this skinny guy out the front singing these huge ballads, and I was singing pretty well back then.
Well, and, tell me, Jeff, are we talking, when did Kush formally stop playing as a band?
When did we start playing?
Stop playing as a band.
About 76, maybe, I think.
Right. So therefore, how long do you stay in Australia before you jet off to London?
Well, what happened then was, like, towards the end of Kush, I was doing all these other shows. Remember Bananas? I was
I remember it
comparing
well.
Bananas. I was comparing there. Look, I was just a bit of a do anything sort of rags trade entertainer, doing all sorts of things. At the same time, I was doing so much television. I was on morning shows, afternoon shows, evening shows, rock shows, whatever. I was doing everything, doing whatever. People just had me on as a bit of a personality. Quite often, I wouldn't even sing.
Well, I think if you think Jeff Duff, what comes to mind is artist in a band, so let's say Kush, and an entertainer, say front person, can give you a great cabaret show too. I'll call it cabaret, but you can call it what you want, and also TV personality. That's how I get it. So Jeff Duff has the ability to go across all those mediums. There's no doubt about it. Everybody knew who Jeff Duff was.
Yeah, I mean, even when I went, I mean, we haven't got to London yet. Even when I went to London, I remember Wendy Stapleton. She went over there with her band. What were they called?
Wendy Stapleton and the Rockets.
Wendy and the Rockets. She said to me when she arrived in London in 1980 or something, she said, everybody knew who Duffo was. Everybody wanted to see Duffo. Everybody wanted Duffo in the band. And it's true. In like before that.
Well, hold on. You've gone ahead there. I want to explore. Yeah. So therefore, about 76, 77, you've played around Melbourne, Australia for a while. When do you leave for London?
Well, and also that 77, 78, I decided I was being fed all this punk and new wave music from London, from a guy called Laurie Dunn, who was the head of WEA in Australia.
I know Laurie Dunn very well. He then became the head of Virgin Australia. Laurie Dunn.
So he was connected with the first Kush album, second Kush album. So when I arrived before I arrived in London, Laurie was sending me punk clothing from Kings Road, like some. These fashionable shops, I was getting, ripped T-shirts and ripped trousers and stuff, and I really loved it. And I loved all the punk music, the Sex Pistols, et al. From the time. And because Laurie had all of a sudden become head of Virgin International, he said, "Duffo, you're wasting your time in Australia, coming over to England." So I did a thing called the Jeff Duff Survival Show, which I had. That's when I had the guys from Little River Band, and we did a tour of Australia, doing, because I had a bit of enough of a name to headline shows, and
so you've headed to London, you've started doing some shows, right?
77, 78. I arrived in London in 78.
Now, I presume what you tried to do, and music was changing extremely quickly in London, because London really to me was the hub of creativity. So you're there trying to decipher what you're going to do, what style you're going to be.
No. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was aiming at world domination. I was so cocky and confident, and mainly with the stage thing. But I started writing, songs too. So I started writing songs for what I consider would be my debut album in London. And Laurie and Ray, I don't know if you remember Ray Hearn, who was...
I don't know Ray. I knew Laurie.
They all worked with John Woodruff and co. in Dirty Pool. It's a management company. Right. They had Ice House. They had me. They had, I think they had Cold Chisel. They had a couple of other, fairly big bands, and Flowers. That's right.
Oh yeah, Flowers. Yeah.
And Ray said to me, he said, before you leave to London, I'm going to team you up with Flowers. So you're going to be the singer at the front of Flowers with Ivor Davies and co. So we did doing, we were doing Bondi Lifesaver and all these wine bars and things around Sydney to earn enough money to go and support myself in London. So we did that for a while, and then I'd been writing these songs, and I had, by the time I arrived in London, I had enough demos to record a new album, and I went round to all these record companies in 78, 79. And Beggars Banquet loved my songs.
Very famous label. Very famous label.
Yeah. So and they released the first Duffo album, which I had the hit single "Give Me Back My Brain" on the single.
So is that the Disappearing Boy album?
No. That was the 3 albums in. I recorded half a dozen albums in London.
So tell me, was the one you're talking about, because I'm looking at your albums,
Duffo one with my weird eyes coming out.
Right. So we got Bob the Birdman. We got
the Disappearing Boy was the second album. Bob the Birdman was the third one, and Lexicon was the fourth one.
Right. Okay. So they're all your London albums.
Yeah, and there was recordings and releases in between too. I was on a lot of comps because I had, by then, after the original album, I started, PVK Records, which is a real musicians label. I had Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac, who ended up playing on my album as well, and David Ball from Procol Harum. I mean, these are all, I guess, what you'd call dinosaur bands, but I ended up working with them.
Well, I know who they are, but, obviously a lot of young audience would know who we're talking about. But Procol Harum were very influential in that prog rock area, and, had several big hits.
Well, it was Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. He was the guitarist. He became my friend in London because he was on the same label as me. And so obviously he played on my album. Look, I was spoiled with music. I had the most incredible musicians in the world when I was in London. Yeah. And, and I was really spoiled. But
well, if anybody has a look or has a copy or has had a read of your book, they will see a lot of the pictures from back then and stories. And, I think the one I really love is the one you're there with Paul McCartney. So you're obviously mingling with, I'll call it the rich and famous in the music business.
I mean, it was amazing because of the first album, I was attracting people at my concerts in London. David Bowie would come to my shows to watch me, and Paul McCartney. I remember the first time I met Paul McCartney. I'd created such a fuss in London. Paul McCartney invited me to his birthday, and I thought, wow, this is, I was a Beatles fan back in Australia, so for me that was a big deal, and all of a sudden I was an A-list celebrity. It was only short-lived, but and that's where you'd meet a lot of your musical heroes, and you'd start talking and forming bands out of those, the Champagne Breakfasts or whatever.
I mean, your version of Walk on the Wild Side, how, what kind of splash did it make back then?
It was huge in Europe. I mean, it was released in, I don't know, half a dozen or more European countries, and it became a big dance floor hit. And I remember when we first did the demo, it was with the Duffo band. We did some demos, and I just said, I really love Walking the Wild Side. Let's just, you all know the chords. Let's just bash it out. And we bashed it out, and that became the recording. The first recording of Walking the Wild Side was Bob the Birdman, and that became a big hit. I remember in France, Germany, Holland, Spain, and Italy.
Oh, yeah, fantastic record. I love that record.
And then we did, I recorded it another half a dozen times. I even recorded it with an orchestra, an orchestral version. Well,
tell me, we've got the whole London connection. Why come back to Australia, Jeff?
Big mistake. I don't know. I was there for 10 years in London, and I was creating. I was successful in an indie sort of way. Yeah. And I was with some great. I was with Cherry Red Records, Beggars Banquet Records, PVK Records. Yeah. I was with these great indie labels. I just thought, what am I missing out on in Australia? I hadn't really. Look, I disconnected from Australia completely. I didn't want to know because literally I reached a standstill in Australia before I left, and I thought, I had to get out of here. And also the lure of the whole punk new wave thing, that really appealed to me. And then all of a sudden, I think things were happening back in Australia at about, mid-'80s. And I thought, I'll go back and investigate.
I agree with you. On an international level, things started to really hot up for Australian acts.
the In Excess and Men at Work and Midnight Oil and all these things started happening internationally, as well as locally, of course. And I thought, all right, I'll go back there because I am an Aussie.
How were you going with your visa too? Were you thrown out because of your visa expiring, or not an issue?
No, I'm a British subject.
Right,
gotcha. I have Scottish heritage. My father was born in Scotland.
Yeah, so you can go back any time.
Yeah, I plan on going back. Actually, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but my new album has been produced by the guy that co-produced 3 of my albums in London. So we did it during COVID. I know I'm jumping ahead.
No, we will get to that. So from coming back to Australia, what I recollect is suddenly we hadn't heard of Jeff. Essentially, to me, you'd kind of died. Nobody even knew where you were, what you were doing, but you were doing quite a lot in London. And then suddenly you're on every TV show you could imagine.
Yeah. Well, look, the Duff album was released in Australia on WEA, and I think the Bob the Birdman was released locally on a local label as well. And Walk on the Wild Side was released, but I didn't get much attention because I wasn't here. So.
I would, and look, if you were doing what you were doing, who would care? Who cares what's happening in Australia? I mean, remember back then, I think we were only about 14 million people, weren't we, or 12 million people? Who would care? You're in London. Australia has no ability to enhance your career if you're over there. Over there is what's happening, and that's where you kick on. So, but it was, as you said, suddenly something was kind of bubbling away over here. But that wasn't during while you were in London. That was when you got back. It had just started when you decided, well, I'll come back to Australia. And so you're right, those kind of acts you mentioned earlier are starting to hit the world stage. So suddenly, yes, you can come back, and all I used to see was Jeff Duff on every TV show that was imaginable. And that even meant evening shows, midday shows, morning shows. And
cooking shows. I was on everything. Sporting shows. It was ridiculous. And I really...
And having all various types of bands with you too, whether it was a backing tape, whether it was a rock band, or whether it was a horn section or
an orchestra.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the versatility was unbelievable. And I mean, the albums that you've got out kind of do show that, for all the audience to know that Jeff has about 28 albums, 27, 28.
So I think my new album is my 30th.
Yeah, well, there you go. So 29, so we're going to our 30th. So that's how many records Jeff has put out in various different forms of genres too. And for example, so you've come back and you're doing all this work, and something I'd like to just explore a bit is that the ability for Jeff to go across from what you're doing with Kush, what you're doing with your pop side, orchestra side, and then you come out with Alien Sex Gods. And my God, I love that record. I mean, that is a good, strong rock album. So what happened there? Yeah,
well, look, that I blame that album on my punk roots from London, because even though I wasn't a fully fledged punk when I was in London, I loved, as I told you, that was the thing that attracted me to London. So I still had this punk yearning. So when I arrived back in Australia, I formed the Alien Sex Gods, and we recorded that mini album. Great songs. I loved that album. We did shows, but there wasn't much interest. That was like 89 or something like that. 88, 89.
It was, it was. No, 89, yeah.
No, there wasn't that much interest in that sort of music then. People had heard of the Sex Pistols and the Stranglers and the Clash and stuff, but there wasn't much interest. I know Birthday Party said that they were a punk band, but they weren't. None of the Australian so-called punk bands were really punk bands. So I said to the musicians, Peter Northcote, the guitarist, and Peter Drummond, the drummer.
So that was Peter Northcote in Alien Sex.
In the Alien Sex Guys.
Oh, wow.
And Peter and Peter Drummond, who's probably one of the best drummers in the world. I mean, he tours around the world, doing sessions and things. So, and I mean, I still love the period of the Alien Sex guys, because it was sort of like, the musicians are too good to be in a punk, to be called punks.
Yeah.
But we played sort of punk, aggressive. Well, you've heard that album, that Alien Sex guys. It's sort of punky rock.
It's fantastic
music.
Fantastic. Well, then we move on to Kiss My Apocalypse, and what great cover art. Tell me a little bit about it. We've got Hide and Seek, New Boy in Heaven, Sexual, Never Too Late for Praying, In Space, Everybody, Easy Street Again, redone. So this is Kiss My Apocalypse. It's Jeff Duff and the Prophets. But what was
that was getting back to the push route again, with the horn section, and like the best musicians in Australia on the Prophets album. We had incredible people. We even had a guitarist from Chicago guesting on that album.
Oh wow, fantastic!
Because he came and toured with the Prophets in Australia.
Now then we've got the best of album. I love that too. Martian Girls Are Easy, and that gives a really in-depth for everybody listening. It is one of the better ones if you want to get a cross-section of Jeff's music.
Compilation.
Yeah, it gives you all of that. We then go to live and acoustic. We've got Ground Control to Frank Sinatra. You're driving me wild here, Jeff. It just keeps going. Fragile Spaceman. And again, cover art is great. Now we get to Walking on Eggshells, which is now going back a bit. It's like 2014. And, with the pandemic, we've all lost 2 or 3 years of our life. I quite frankly am still just pre-pandemic. It was a blur to me. It went in a blink and we'd lost 3 years of our lives. Whether we agree with it or not is another thing. And so you got this beforehand, and what a sensational record it is. And to me, it is a rock album edging with a bit of pop, but essentially kind of rock. How did it come along, and how long did it take to develop and record?
Well, I've never stopped writing and recording. So, I was demoing songs all the time, and thankfully teaming up with, great musicians. With Walking on Eggshells, Steve Bull, the bass player from Icehouse. Funny, I've had this connection with Icehouse, Ivor Davies, etc. Nearly all of my career. There's always been some sort of connection. Anyway, Steve Bull called me one day. I'd never worked with him before. Oh, maybe I've done some of those tribute shows with him, because he does a lot of those. And he said, Duffo, would you like to listen to some music I've written? He said they're just pieces of music. They don't have any melodies or choruses or verses or arrangements as such. They're just slices of music. And I said, send them to me. So he sent me one, and I ended up writing a lyric and a melody to it, then another one, and all of a sudden we had an album. So all those songs on Walking on Eggshells are Steve Bull and Jeff Duff compositions, written out of, I guess, little slices of music that he'd recorded and he didn't know what to do with.
Well, I think people should do themselves a favour. It is a sensational record. I love it, and have it on one of my playlists, which I kind of play every day. And Walking on Eggshells too is just sensational. So tell me, although I think there's some explicit lyrics in there, I don't know about that.
Are there?
Well, there are.
Really? I can't remember. Right.
Well, Spotify have said so. They've put an E for explicit on it. I never knew you were that way inclined to give explicit lyrics.
No, I don't think so.
Well,
really.
We might have to investigate that.
And also, Paul Wheeler, the drummer for My House, was on that album, I'm Walking on Eggshells too.
Oh, okay. Well, so look, we've got that now. Let's go. I can tell the audience there's just so many albums, we can't go through them all. So let's talk about the new record and what's going on. I want to explore that and what style and genres you put in that, because if they go away and listen to Walking on Eggshells now, are they going to hear the same kind of thing on the next record, or have you done a bit of a U-turn?
No, because look, the album before Walking on Eggshells was Fragile Space, and I've been very, very influenced by David Bowie all of my career, like right from art school. Look, I'm going back a bit, but I have to tell you this because it's been an important part, and I dedicated my autobiography to David Bowie because he just passed away when that came out in 2016. So he's been a major influence, not musically, but stylishly as a style master and like as a a fashionista. So no doubt his music did rub off on me. And so Fragile Spaceman before Walking on Eggshells was an album that I'd written basically about my feelings about David Bowie. And then when we got to Walking on Eggshells, it was a progression of that vibe from the Fragile Spaceman album.
Yeah, yep.
And
so are we heading in the same direction with the new record?
it's easy for me to get sidetracked in the conversation.
No, that's okay. So are we heading in the same direction with the new record? Is it essentially a rock record, a rock with pop, or is it does it have some nuance?
No, because I've done a lot of work with orchestral work, and I had a Jeff Duff orchestra. A lot of the new album is, and I wrote it during the lockdown period in Australia, 2019, 2020, 2021, with a producer in London, as I mentioned before. Sid Lukowicz has produced it and co-written it with me. We wrote it all online. I guess it would have been 2020, really. That was the lockdown period.
Yeah.
And it's big production. I guess it's a little bit prog rock. For me, I keep going back to my roots with a lot of the music. So it's a bit prog rocky, but it's also big singing, big. Look, it's probably considered pretty daggy by younger people, but great songs, big melodies, big choruses, big hooks, and big production.
Well, when can people expect to hear something from the new record?
Well, it was just mastered in the last couple of weeks. We're just doing the artwork now. And as you know, with all the photographs and images of me, I have so much, such great visual things. We have to, decide on an album cover. I just spoke to Mad CD yesterday, and I think you were one of them. They talked me out of doing. I was going to do a short run of vinyl album, and you and a number of musicians said, "Look, it's a waste of time if you're just looking at merchandise for gigs. Just do CDs. It's a bit of memorabilia for the audience to take away." So I'm just going to do CDs.
And I think so. Look, we at Laneway, we understand artists need some product to sell at their shows when they're doing the amount of shows that you're doing, and we totally understand on the lower volumes. We disagree with high volume sales of CDs and vinyl, and I'll tell you why. It's because CD will never decompose, has a lifespan of 1,000 years, so essentially will never, and goes into landfill. And one of the most blasphemous things that we used to do here in Australia is we used to send over container loads of rubbish to Indonesia. We'd send our rubbish over there. That's disgusting. And what used to happen was they would be container loads full of CDs, which they would throw into landfill. It's a blot on society and on the world, and we're totally against them on a large volume. So I think you're probably doing the right thing. Vinyl, not as much because it's made from oil, but it still takes a long time to decompose.
To break down, yeah. Definitely.
And so we have to think about those things. We are fairly anti-establishment here at Laneway. We try to go against the grain and push up against the standards of today that go back to the old world. And so that's our opinion on that. That's why we are digital.
Yeah, you have a green mentality, and I think, you have to nowadays.
And I think, I'd like to ask you also, we get a lot of this, is that people continually tell me, if we're putting on a live show, and we don't do a lot of live shows, Jeff, because it's not what we do and it's not our forte. But if we're doing a pretty big live show, and I have artists that all complain about digital, I'll hear them all complaining, and I say to them, well, this show is being put on through digital sales. That's who's paying for this show. And the digital landscape does work for a lot of people, and it can bring in very good income.
Streaming.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think one of the stories I always remember was Taylor Swift and Peter Frampton. But say Peter Frampton saying that he'd had 20 million streams and he'd made a couple of $1,000 or whatever he'd made. But what people need to remember, which he doesn't tell everybody, and I have had dealings with Peter Frampton, and he's a lovely guy. So this is not saying anything derogatory, but what they forget to say, and we see with a lot of bands here in Australia from the 70s, is their contracts in the 70s were on 3.5% of wholesale price, and the wholesale price is manipulated by the majors anyway. Okay, 3.5%. How an artist could survive on 3.5% is beyond me. Now we go to digital sales and have had, say, 20 million digital sales and they've made $20,000. That's because they're still on that original deal of 3.5%. And if they were lucky, they're on 12%. And then you got to the 80s and your maximum we would ever give out would be 18%, but it'd be around 12 to 18. Now, these are shocking figures, and that's what existed. And the situation has totally turned now. Now, for the older artist, it's a lot more difficult, Jeff, because they have to come to grips with this new social media digital world. But for the young artist, the prospects and the horizons have never been better, and they know how to run this system, and they could put out a song and not even be big and still have 150,000 streams and make quite good money from that. I mean, if we look at bands like here in Melbourne, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who are doing their own things, and Kingswood, these are bands that have shunned the major labels. But
they're mainstream now, that King, aren't they?
What, we'll say that again?
They'd be considered a mainstream band nowadays, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
King Gizzard and the Lizard Gizzard.
Yeah, not with a major label, though, on their own. They run everything themselves. They are. Yeah, absolutely they are. These guys are running their lives. They're all making a great income out of this, and I find that really exciting. I think the whole landscape, I'll go back to your whole career and how privileged you've been being in the entertainment business. And I remember a person saying to me, and I won't mention who it was, but said, if you leave the entertainment business, Vince, you'll regret it because you'll never get back in. So I never left.
No, that's true. Look, that's one of the reasons why I've never, ever stopped. People saying, well, are you still making records, still doing concerts? I mean, at the moment, I know you say I do a lot of gigs. At the moment, I've got so many shows on, big headlining concerts around Australia with, I keep getting asked to do things, and I would never say no if it involves singing and entertaining. So I just keep doing them. I'm doing. Look, I do a lot of David Bowie shows. I know those independent young bands, they can make money from streaming. I can't do that so much. So I perform live, and I do because of my affiliation with David Bowie. Because I knew him quite well in London, and he lives next door to me here in Sydney. I do David Bowie shows. People sort of associate me with Bowie. So I do all forms of David Bowie shows, which I really love doing. I love the material and stuff, but I can't really make any money from my recordings, as you know.
I know. Yeah.
Those younger bands, they get lots of streams. I don't, because who cares about Jeff Duff?
But you still have a very privileged position. Here's an artist at your age and your part of your career where you are still doing shows like at the Sydney Opera House.
I've got 5 shows coming up in June.
There you go. And I think for the audience to know, Jeff Duff is very privileged. And we've got to say that because remember, it's the punters who come and see you and support you who generate the ability for you to continue to do this. I find it very insulting when artists, make out it's all about them and who really cares about the punters. And we see this with a lot of these big glam American bands. They go off the rockers and they're going off the bend and.
With the heritage bands or the new?
Yeah, well, I know more the heritage bands, the Motley Crues and all these kind of
Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, where the audience is really superfluous, and they try and make out now that that's all about the audience, but they just go so far off the rocks. Well, it's all about the audience, and that's why, as musicians, and I'm a musician myself, that we're here, and we must respect them because they respect your music by listening to it and coming to see you play. So I think that, you're in a very, very good a position where you're doing so many gigs and there's just so many artists of your ilk that just can't do that, and you've got your tribute shows which do that, but it gives you the ability to go out and write and put out your own material. And yes, your own solo material hasn't taken off like what you're doing with the Bowies or the Chicago shows and all that, but one intertwines with itself and gives you the ability to be in the entertainment business. And as we say, don't ever leave. It's been a privilege being in the entertainment business. I get up every day, and I want you to tell the audience if you're the same. I get up every day, Jeff, and I'm excited. I'm excited about what I do. I love when someone like Jeff Duff sends me his new record, which new song, which nobody has heard. And I go, man, am I privileged to be the first one listening to this? How do you feel? Do you get up every day and just go, oh, wow, what a life?
Oh, yeah, I do. Look, I feel privileged because, I live in a beautiful, beautiful part of Sydney. I mean, my balcony overlooks the harbour and stuff, and I'm doing exactly what I want to do. I'm writing and performing and playing my own music, and I'm doing. Look, in order, you must be aware now. In order to survive, even as an original musician, you can't really make money doing original music. So everybody's doing tribute shows. All the best known musicians in Australia are all doing tributes. They might call it something else, but at the end of the day, it's still a tribute. They're playing someone else's music, whether it's covers or impersonations or tributes, So that's the way we make money, and it's unfortunate. I hate that. Sometimes, yes, I wake up and I'm excited, but sometimes I wake up and I think, fuck, I have to be David Bowie tonight for, at the Opera House. And I think sometimes I feel disgusted that I've got into that situation.
You didn't use the fuck word there, did you?
Oh, sorry,
did you say that? I don't think I've ever heard you use a word like that, and I've known you many years. Oh, Jeffrey.
I get so passionate about the whole thing because, look, it's only in the last 10 years really that that the whole world has turned into a tribute. And I get invited to do these tributes. I think, I don't really, really want to sing any more David Bowie shows in different formats. I do enough,
Yeah.
But then again, I think that David Bowie pays my rent or whoever,
it's not just that, Jeff. You're supporting, and it is you're supporting a band. That band wouldn't be doing that if you weren't out there doing it out front. And so you're creating work and jobs for these people. And it really does come back to you. And I think that's another, I'll take my hat off to you, that those bands of yours, because you have various bands, you're providing a living for them too.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, and look, all the bands that end up doing tributes, they always, head towards the music that they grew up with as teenagers. They want to be in a Led Zeppelin band, a Rolling Stones band, a Beatles band. So they end up playing the music that they grew up with, which is really good. And you're right, it does. The tribute world does employ a lot of musicians that wouldn't be working if it wasn't for the tribute band.
Just before we sign off, I want to ask you something there. You said something about, new musicians and older musicians and playing. Well, and it is a mentality thing. It's difficult for me to come to grips with new music if it's not in the style that I grew up with, and to remember those songs. So let's, think about some big hits now, and you probably go, I can't even remember them, Vince. And then you go back to songs that were, big hits, I don't know, China Grove by Doobie Brothers or Toulouse Street or, whatever the albums were, or Pink Floyd, and you can remember them to the day. They're very, they're embedded into your brain. And so I don't know if you see it the same way, and is it just because we're older, Jeff, and we can't come to grips with that newer style of creativity?
Yeah. Look, I think, Vincent, when you and I grew up, particularly in Melbourne, we were, there was an onslaught on radio, television, whatever, of all those great, what people call dinosaur bands. We had Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, we had the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, David Bowie. We had all those incredible bands, and they were all memorable bands with incredible songs. The repertoire of original songs was amazing. And it seems like we're always harking back to those days because nothing has gotten any better.
Yeah.
That was the peak of modern pop rock music, and nothing has progressed. You do get offshoots, like with people like Sting and stuff, but really, he's really just progressing from what he was doing with Police. And Paul McCartney, the same with the Beatles and whoever from what I hate that term dinosaur bands, but I suppose, it's as fitting as any other term we want to use.
Well,
but we do, we're continually harking back to those bands and that music and those periods because they were the best.
Yeah, if I was to say to you, widen the word rock, and rock never dies. And it kind of is true if you go back to from, say, 69 onwards and think rock, and I want you to widen that word, what rock covers, it never dies. It has never died. But if we go through all the genre changes, a lot of them have died off, and they do come around again. They do 360s and they do come back. But rock, it just goes across rock, and rock goes across blues, and rock goes across country, and rock goes across, even disco. Rock never dies. I don't know. Do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I think the only way rock music, if that's the broad term, can progress is by fusing it. So, which has happened in world music. People fusing different genres of music, but it's still under the rock idiom. So you get all sorts. That's where rock has come from. These incredible musicians, but they're branching outside of the normal, 4-piece rock.
Yeah, band. I think you could add to the word rock rhythm and blues, or you could say a lot would say rhythm and blues, but for a younger audience, I think they get confused. So you say rock, but it's really kind of rock, rhythm and blues, because that's where you're Free, Bad Company, Jeff Beck, all these artists, Steve Marriott, everybody came from, correct?
Yeah, look, I know you've mentioned Steve Marriott before. Look, I thought Steve Marriott was a genius. I thought, like a great singer. That was basically blues, British blues music, but they ended up writing great rock songs, Tin Soldier and Itchy-Coo-Park and all those things. Fantastic songs, but Steve Marriott was a blues singer. I don't know if you remember, if you go back that far.
No, I don't.
But, they were blues musicians, but they ended up writing great rock songs.
You had from the Small Faces to Steve Marriott to straight to Humble Pie, which Peter Frampton, and then back to Humble Pie, then he moved on. And anyway, it just, Steve Marriott to me was a sensational artist. And
he's the god, he's the best. Yeah, and the most incredible blues singer, really, where if you listen to him singing, amazing.
Absolutely. So, well, Jeff, we've been going just on an hour now. So I don't know if we're boring the listeners or whether, we could keep talking all day, you and me, I think, really. But it's been fantastic to talk to you, and we'd like to talk to you again. These podcasts are new for Laneway, and we felt that we needed to do these to get an in-depth look at the artists that we support. We can't wait to see you again. For everybody listening to, Jeff did have a crack at me this week and said, I thought I would have seen you at my shows last week. I said, there's only so many shows I can go to of artists in general. And I think it was one of those nights where I couldn't even listen to music because I'd had enough. But I will be at your next shows in Melbourne or whether I'm in Sydney, and it will be absolutely fantastic to catch up. I'd like everybody to say thanks to Jeff, and we'll talk to you soon, Jeffrey.
And there it is, another Laneway Talks. If you enjoyed that, there's more. Just search Laneway Talks for more great conversations.
G'day folks, Mark Allen here and
The Ox, David Schwartz.
and we've started a brand new podcast called
A couple of blokes, a couple of beers, and we just chew on the fat.
Couple of blokes, couple of beers with Ox and Marco.
I'm thinking about whitening my teeth just so when I smile.
There's a new episode every Wednesday.
Have you got a weight issue?
Of course I do. It's a stupid loaded question.
A couple of blokes, couple of beers with David Schwartz and Mark Allen.
I'm eating the kids' Maltese.
You're eating
Piece
their
of-
Christmas present.
I am a piece of garbage.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts.